Chapter 1: Religion and the Courts. In recent years, clashes over religious expressions have been among the most frequent controversies decided by federal courts, with the U.S. Supreme Court having issued numerous rulings on the subject, a previously unprecedented practice in American history. Consequently, a body of 9 unelected justices now exercises more control over how, when, where, or if public religious activities will occur than any other entity in America. In fact, one justice describes the court as a national theology board. The modern court largely amassed its control over religion first by discarding the traditional limitations of the religion clauses of the First Amendment, and then by adopting the phrase separation of church and state as the modern measuring stick for judging the propriety of a challenged religious expression. By imputing a non historic meaning to this celebrated historic phrase, the modern court began declaring unconstitutional many long standing religious practices and expressions. The subsequent overzealous application by state and local officials of these court decisions and of the separation phrase in general produced even greater restrictions. Because of the current widespread coupling of separation of church and state with First Amendment controversies, many Americans now believe that the phrase is part of the First Amendment. Yet concerning religion, the First Amendment only states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. For generations after its ratification, the courts relied solely on the clear and unambiguous wording of the First Amendment. The reliance on the separation metaphor is a recent judicial trend. For example, in the Supreme Court's first 150 years, the separation idiom was invoked by the court in only 2 cases. It has since been cited in seemingly countless cases. In fact, in actual cases filed under the First Amendment's religion clauses in recent decades, the First Amendment was cited by courts in less than 3,000 cases, while the separation metaphor was cited in over 4,000. Strikingly, in examining the First Amendment controversies, courts are more likely to cite the separation metaphor than they are the First Amendment itself. That metaphor became the contemporary standard for judicial policy in 1947 in Everson versus Board of Education, when the court proclaimed, "The First Amendment has erected a wall between church and state. That wall must be kept high and impregnable. We could not approve the slightest breach." Relying on this phrase rather than the First Amendment, courts began striking down religious activities and expressions that had long been constitutional. The result has been a series of unprecedented decisions that defy common sense and mystify average citizens. For example, a citizen riding a public bus cannot give a fellow rider a book containing Bible stories. Anderson v. Milwaukee County, 2006. A Bible school or church may not use the word seminary or issue biblical degrees unless the state first pre-approves the Bible courses, Bible teachers, and theological curriculum. HEB Ministries versus Texas, 2003. It is unconstitutional for an historic memorial, even to the fallen or slain, to contain a cross as part of its display, no matter how many previous decades the memorial had been standing. Lowe versus City of Eugene, 1969. Ellis versus City of La Mesa, 1993. Buono versus Norton, 2005. American Humanist Association versus City of Lake Elsinore, 2013. And others. It is unconstitutional for the Ten Commandments to continue being displayed in a solitary setting at public courthouses and government buildings, despite the fact that the Ten Commandments are a basis of civil law in the Western world and are depicted in multiple locations throughout the U.S. Supreme Court and other federal buildings. Harvey versus Cobb County, 1993. Aclu of Tennessee and versus Hamilton County, 2002. Red River Freethinkers versus City of Fargo, 2012, and others. It is even unconstitutional for a courtroom to display the Ten Commandments among a collection of other historic documents related to American law, such as the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Mayflower Compact. Acklow of Kentucky versus Grayson County, 2002, Turner versus Habersham County, 2003, McCreary County versus ACLU, 2005, Green versus Haskell County Board of Commissioners, 2009, and others. It is unconstitutional for a public cemetery to have a planter in the shape of a cross, for if someone were to view that cross, it could cause emotional distress and thus constitute an injury in fact. Warsaw versus Tehachapi, 1990. In city seals with numerous symbols representing diverse aspects of a community, for example, its industry, commerce, history, flora, schools, etc., it is unconstitutional for any of those symbols to depict a religious element, even if religion was a primary historic influence in the city's founding. Friedman versus Board of County Commissioners, 1985. Harris versus City of Zion, 1991. Kuhn versus City of Rolling Meadows, 1991. Robinson versus City of Edmond, 1995. ACLU of Ohio versus City of Stowe, 1998. Webb versus City of Republic, 1999. It is unconstitutional for a nativity scene to be displayed on public property unless surrounded by sufficient secular displays to prevent it from appearing religious. ACLU versus City of Birmingham, 1986. County of Allegheny versus ACLU, 1989. Amancio versus Town of Somerset, 1998. ACLU of New Jersey versus Schundler, 1997 and 1999. ACLU versus City of Florissant, 1999. It is unconstitutional for Christians to pray public prayers that reflect their own personal faith and beliefs. Doe versus Santa Fe, ISD, 1995. Furley versus Aledo, ISD, 1999. Rubin versus City of Burbank, 2002. Higg versus Carroll County, Maryland, 2014, and others. Even though the actual wording of a bill may be constitutional, the bill becomes unconstitutional if the legislator who introduced it had a religious activity in his mind. Wallace versus Jaffrey, 1985. These decisions are representative of the current hostility towards traditional religious expressions, and the hostility has spread well beyond the courts, now permeating the official public square. For example, in Minnesota, a state employee was barred from parking his car in the state parking lot because he had religious stickers on his bumper. A military honor guardsman who was part of a special unit that conducted military funeral solemnities for fallen soldiers was removed from his position for saying, "God bless you and this family, and God bless the United States of America," while presenting a military family with a folded flag in honor of the deceased family member, even though he had been asked by the family to include that blessing in the flag presentation to them. In Defuniak Springs, Florida, a judge ordered that a copy of the Ten Commandments in the courthouse be covered during a murder trial, fearing that if jurors saw the command, "Do not kill," they would be prejudiced against the defendant. In Balk Spring, Texas, senior citizens meeting at a community center were prohibited from praying over their meals. In Russellville, Kentucky, a library employee was barred from wearing her necklace because it had a small cross on it. And in Clymer, Pennsylvania, a school employee was suspended for wearing a necklace with a cross. Although states print hundreds of thousands of custom license plates, plates ordered and purchased by individual citizens, Oregon refused to print "Pray." Virginia refused to print "God for Us." Vermont refused to print Romans 5 or JN36TN. And Utah refused to print "Thank God," claiming that such customized license plates violated the separation of church and state. In cities in Texas, Indiana, Ohio, Georgia, Florida, South Dakota, Minnesota, New York, Louisiana, and Nebraska, not only were citizens not permitted to hand out religious literature on public sidewalks or preach in public areas, but several were arrested for doing so. In Memphis, Tennessee, a library offered shelves for displaying community advertisements and announcements. When a local church placed a notification of its upcoming Christmas program and a small nativity scene on the shelf, the library required the removal of Joseph, Mary, Jesus, and the wise men from the scene, leaving only the farm animals. In Eau Claire, Wisconsin, college students serving as residential assistants were prohibited from holding Bible studies in their own private dorm rooms, even though discussion groups on any other topic were permitted. In York, Pennsylvania, because a prosecuting attorney mentioned 7 words from the Bible in a courtroom, a statement that lasted less than 5 seconds, a jury sentence was overturned for a man convicted of brutally clubbing to death a 71-year-old woman in order to steal her Social Security check. In the name of separation of church and state, courts and public officials have clearly imposed unreasonable restrictions on religious free speech across the general public sphere. And they have imposed even more egregious restrictions on students and education. For example, if students are given the latitude of creating artwork of their own choosing, it is unconstitutional for them to include a religious image in their artwork. Jokey versus Board of Education of the Schuylerville Central School District, 1990. CH versus Oliva, 2000. Fleming versus Jefferson County School District, 2002. Peck versus Baldwinsville Central School District, 2005. Student artwork containing religious symbols such as a Bible or a cross may be treated as gang symbols, profanity, and satanic signs. Bannon versus School District of Palm Beach County, 2004. In 9 Western states, courts ruled it constitutional for public schools to require a 3-week indoctrination in the Islamic faith in which all junior high students must pretend they are Muslims and offer prayers to Allah. They are further encouraged to take Islamic names, call each other by those names, wear Islamic garb, participate in jihad games, and read the Quran during those 3 weeks. Yet the same court ruled it unconstitutional for those students voluntarily to mention "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance. Eklund versus Byron, USD, 2005, and Newdow versus U.S. Congress, 2002. It is unconstitutional to use a school PA system to inform students of a national crisis and ask that they pray for the victims. Furthermore, it is unconstitutional for students to engage in student-led, student-initiated discussions of religion during classroom activities, and a federally selected monitor may be appointed in order to ensure compliance with student religious speech prohibitions. Chandler versus James, 1997. If students are slain in a school shooting and fellow students create a memorial to their fallen friends, it is unconstitutional for that memorial to include any religious element or acknowledgement among the personal remembrances of students. Fleming versus Jefferson County School District, 2002. Classic historic paintings may be displayed in schools unless they depict something religious. Washagesic versus Bloomingdale Public School, 1994. Sklar versus Harrison County School Board, 2006. Alquist versus City of Cranston, 2012. It is unconstitutional even to see the 10 Commandments at school, since students might voluntarily read, meditate upon, respect, or obey them. Stone versus Graham, 1980. See also Ring versus Grand Forks Public School District, 1980. Doe versus Harlan County School District, 2000. McCreary County versus ACLU, 2005. Doe versus School Board of Giles County, 2011, and others. It is unconstitutional for a graduating valedictorian to include personal comments about his or her own faith in their own celebratory speech. Therefore, a student's valedictory address may be reviewed and censored by school officials prior to being delivered. Furley versus Aledo ISD, 1999. Cole versus Oroville Union High School District, 2000. Griffith versus Butt School District Number 1, 2011, and others. If a school baccalaureate is held in a religious building, it is unconstitutional for public school officials who attend that meeting to be publicly recognized or honored. Doe versus Santa Fe ISD, 1995. It is unconstitutional for a school graduation ceremony to contain an opening or closing prayer, even if it is the decision of the graduating class. Graham versus Central Community School District, 1985. Lee versus Weissman, 1992. Davini versus Board of Education, Kanawha County, 2002. Workman versus Greenwood Community School Corporation, 2010, and others. It is unconstitutional to present students the concept of the Creator, which is so openly acknowledged in the Declaration of Independence and numerous other founding writings. Edwards versus Aguilard, 1987. Freiler versus Tangapawa Parish, Board of Education, 1999. Selman versus Cobb County, 2005. Kitzmiller versus Dover Area School District, 2005. Hurst versus Newman, 2006. It is unconstitutional for a classroom library to contain books that deal with Christianity, or for a teacher to be seen with his personal copy of the Bible at school. Roberts v. Madigan, 1990. It is unconstitutional for advertisers who purchase advertising space in school settings to include any religious content in their paid advertisement. DiLoretto v. Downey Unified School Board of Education, 1999. Anderson versus Mexico Academy and Central School, 2002. Oxford Baptist Church versus Catawba County School Board of Education, 2004. It is unconstitutional for a speaker to deliver a secular message to public schools if that expert is also publicly known to be a Christian, even if he is a member of the President's Drug Task Force. Alexander versus Nacogdoches School District, 1991. Carpenter versus Dillon Elementary School District, number 10, 2005. It is unconstitutional for a kindergarten class to ask whose birthday is celebrated by Christmas. Flory versus Sioux Falls School District, 1979. It is constitutional for public schools to display Jewish and Islamic religious holiday symbols, but not Christian ones. Skoros versus City of New York, 2006. There are hundreds of similar rulings. It is therefore not surprising that an independent poll affirmed that 77% of the nation believes that the courts have gone too far in taking religion out of public life, and that 50% believe that judges have singled out Christianity for an attack. Furthermore, as the latter two rulings suggest, Christmas tends to be an especially restrictive time of year, when many schools completely eliminate or severely censor historic holiday words and traditions. For example, Christmas holiday is frequently changed to winter holiday or winter break to avoid using the word Christmas, which is offensive because it contains the word Christ. Students are told they may not refer to Christmas, wish someone a Merry Christmas, have Christmas parties, or decorate Christmas trees, but rather must replace the word Christmas with holiday. For example, Happy Holidays, holiday parties, holiday trees, etc. Many schools eliminate the use of Christmas carols. At other schools, if carols are used in school concerts, the words are rewritten. For example, Christmas is changed to winter in the words of Silent Night. Holy Night are changed to Silent Night, Cold in the Night, or Silent Night, Winter Night. And We Wish You a Merry Christmas becomes We Wish You a Swinging Holiday. Some schools even prohibit purely instrumental arrangements of Christmas carols. Apparently, even though the music contains no words about Christmas, listeners might know the words and recognize it as a Christmas carol, which would be inappropriate. Students are told they may not wear red or green since those colors are associated with Christmas. They may not even give out candy canes to their friends because the candy cane is in the shape of a shepherd's crook and is thus suggestive of the Christmas story. Even beyond the issue of Christmas in schools because of the separation doctrine, in St. Louis, Missouri, a school official caught an elementary student praying over his lunch. He ordered the student out of his seat, reprimanded him in front of the other students, and took him to the principal, who ordered him to stop praying. In Saratoga Springs, New York, a 5-year-old kindergarten student was forbidden to say a prayer over her lunch and was scolded by a teacher for doing so. In Houston, Texas, school officials confiscated the personal Bibles of 2 students and threatened to have the students picked up by Child Protective Services. They also confiscated from the students their personal 10 Commandments book covers. In Poway, California, teachers are not allowed to display historical phrases that contain religious words, such as the Declaration of Independence, national motto, etc. In Orano, Maine, a third grader who wore a t shirt containing the words Jesus Christ was required to turn the shirt inside out so the words could not be seen. In Dixon, Tennessee, high school students were required to write a paper on any topic and to use at least 4 research sources. Some students who wrote about some students wrote about reincarnation, witchcraft, and the occult, but the student who chose to write about the life of Jesus Christ was given a 0 by her teacher for choosing that topic. Additionally, school officials have taken the position that students at school may invite their friends to meetings, unless the meetings are religious, share literature with their friends unless the literature is religious, receive personal gifts from friends unless the gift is a Bible or has a religious message, wear the clothing of their choice unless it has Christian messages, pass out Valentines to classmates unless the Valentines have a religious message, wear costumes at Halloween unless the costume depicts a religious personality. And there are numerous additional examples. While all of this transformation has occurred since 1947 introduction of the separation metaphor in Everson, significantly none of the activities currently restricted represent any violation of the actual wording of the First Amendment. That amendment places prohibitions only against federal Congress and not on the states, communities, schools, or individuals. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. However, under the court's new First Amendment, Congress now means a student or a citizen, teacher, soldier, school, community, etc. Make no law means cannot express one's faith in a public arena. Establish religion means allow religion. And an establishment of religion now means to express one's formerly constitutionally protected free exercise of religion in an official public forum or arena. It is more than a bizarre rendering when Congress, an elected body of the federal legislature, can mean a single individual, and making a law, the action of the federal legislature, can mean expressing one's personal faith in public. The Everson decision, however, was revolutionary, not only for its introduction of the modern separation doctrine, but also for dramatically expanding the role of the federal judiciary. How was this accomplished? By coupling the 14th Amendment's racial civil rights guarantee with the First Amendment's prohibition against the congressional establishment of a national religion. The consequence of merging these two dissimilar amendments was twofold. First, the court reversed the bedrock constitutional standard that the First Amendment limited only the federal but not state or local governments. Second, because the new reading of the First Amendment empowered the court to restrict states, communities, and individuals, the federal judiciary therefore assigned itself the role as sole arbiter of all religious controversies, even to what an individual citizen may or may not do. Yet the massive expansion of the court's federal jurisdiction was achieved only by directly disregarding the specific purposes for which both the First and 14th Amendments were enacted. A fact clearly demonstrated by a brief review of each of those amendments. An overview of the First Amendment. The prominent characteristics of the emerging national government during and after the American Revolution was the strong ardor of the people and the states to protect their traditional powers and rights from the national government. History and experience had both proved that centralized government power could be a source of tyranny and abuse. So, under early national government, such as the Articles of Confederation, policies were enacted not by the concurrence of a simple majority, but rather by a three-fourths supermajority, thus allowing states to easily block the action of the entire national government if they believed their own rights or powers were being infringed. From this backdrop, delegates were selected from the individual states and sent to a national gathering in Philadelphia in 1787. That assembly, now called the Constitutional Convention, produced a new federal government, but it also generated an element of strong opposition. Several delegates, believing that the Constitution contained insufficient barriers to prevent the federal government from usurping state authority in a number of areas, refused to sign the document. This group, known as the Anti Federalists and led by delegates such as George Mason, Luther Martin, John Francis Mercer, and Elbridge Gerry, and joined by prominent founding fathers such as Samuel Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Richard Henry Lee, and Patrick Henry, warned Americans that unless specific amendments were added to the Constitution to limit the powers of the new federal government, it might invade and usurp the rights of states, communities, and individuals. For example, Samuel Adams warned, "I mean to let you know how deeply I am impressed with the sense of the importance of amendments, that the good people may clearly see the distinction, for there is a distinction between the federal powers vested in Congress and the sovereign authority belonging to the several states, which is the palladium, the protector of the private and personal rights of the citizens." When the states assembled conventions to ratify the new federal constitution, those conventions resounded loudly with the anti federalist arguments. The Constitution therefore received only marginal approval in several states, and North Carolina even refused to ratify unless clear restraints were placed on the power of the federal government. Chapter 10 contains greater details on how the states voted. The Constitution was eventually ratified, but a clear message had been delivered. Consequently, when the new federal government assembled, President George Washington promptly urged Congress to consider how the Constitution might be amended in order to address the concerns raised in the state conventions. Congress responded, and the result was 12 proposed amendments specifying exactly what the federal government, and only the federal government, could not do. Of those 12, 10, now termed the Bill of Rights, were ratified by the states. At the top of the ratified list was the amendment completely removing the subject of religion and religious expression from the jurisdiction of the federal government, thereby leaving it as it had been, in the hands of the states and the people. Therefore, the court's 1947 decision to federalize the First Amendment and apply it against the people and the state was a complete abrogation of that amendment. An overview of the 14th Amendment. The means by which the court federalized the Bill of Rights was by rewriting the purpose of the 14th Amendment, one of the three racial civil rights amendments added to the Constitution at the end of the Civil War. The 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, abolished slavery. The 15th, 1870, provided Black Americans the right to vote, and the 14th, 1868, guaranteed state privileges and citizenship regardless of race. Yet in the Everson case, the Supreme Court took the 14th Amendment securing racial civil rights to federalize the issue of religious expressions. Such a possibility was not only unimaginable at the time the 14th Amendment was enacted, but it was even specifically rejected by Congress during that period, as well as by the Supreme Court afterwards. In fact, in 1876, 8 years after the 14th Amendment had been ratified and following two Supreme Court cases on that amendment, a noted commentator reported, "The rule adopted by the Supreme Court of the United States in interpreting the 14th Amendment makes it inapplicable to the religious liberty or any other right of the citizen as determined by the state of which he is resident." The court in the cases of Paul v. Virginia, 8 Wallace p. 168, and of the New Orleans Slaughterhouse, 16 Wallace p. 36, laid down the principle: there is nothing in the last three amendments to the Constitution that reaches the question of religion, and nothing anywhere else in this instrument that places the states under the slightest restraint with reference to this subject. And hence it is true, as remarked by Justice Story, one of the Supreme Court's most noted legal scholars appointed by President James Madison, in his own Commentaries on the Constitution, section 1879, that the whole power over the subject of religion is left exclusively to the state governments to be acted upon according to their sense of justice and the state constitutions. A more complete examination of the 14th Amendment is found in Chapter 10. The effect of the coupling. When one understands the intent of these two amendments, it is not surprising that no previous court had ever coupled them, as did the 1947 Everson Court. In fact, in 1970, Justice William Douglas openly acknowledged that by coupling the 14th Amendment and the Bill of Rights, the court had not only usurped state authority over many areas, but that it had also created an American revolution that involved the imposition of new and far reaching constitutional restraints on the states. Nationalization of many civil liberties has been the consequence of the 14th Amendment, reversing the prehistoric position that the foundations of those liberties rested largely in state law. And so the revolution occasioned by the 14th Amendment has progressed as article after article in the Bill of Rights has been incorporated in it by the court and made applicable to the states. The Everson decision represented a disturbing and unprecedented judicial paradigm shift. Summary. Today, the court divides the religious clauses of the First Amendment into what it terms the Establishment Clause. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, and the Free Exercise Clause, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It is very obvious that no portion of the phrase separation of church and state appears in either of the First Amendment nor in any other part of the Constitution. It is not surprising, therefore, that the recent reliance by the court on this non constitutional phrase has prompted complaints by many constitutional jurists. For example, in Bear v. Cole Morgan, Judge Elbert Gallagher complained, "Much has been written in recent years to a wall of separation between church and state. It has received so much attention that one would almost think, at times, that it is to be found somewhere in our Constitution." Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart similarly observed, "I think that the court's task in this, as in all areas of constitutional adjudication, is not responsibly aided by the uncritical invocation of metaphors like the wall of separation, a phrase nowhere to be found in the Constitution." And Supreme Court Justice William Rehnquist, after describing this phrase as a misleading metaphor, then noted, "But the greatest injury of the wall notion is its mischievous diversion of judges from the actual intentions of the drafters of the Bill of Rights. The wall of separation between church and state is a metaphor based on bad history, a metaphor which has proved useless as a guide to judging. It should be frankly and explicitly abandoned." Regrettably, the public's current understanding, actually misunderstanding, of the religious provisos of the First Amendment has been shaped primarily by a phrase which does not even appear in the Constitution, a phrase almost totally unknown in constitutional jurisprudence for well over a century and a half before the 1947 Everson case. Yet, while all must truthfully concede that the separation metaphor is not actually found in the Constitution, many today nevertheless argue that the phrase as applied today accurately captures the intent of the framers, that the concept of a complete separation, i.e., an enforced secularization of the public square, was practiced by them during the founding era. Is this assertion correct?